Everyone thinks the dollar is dying. They said it in the 1970s when Nixon cut its tie to gold. They said it in 2008 when Wall Street collapsed under its own leverage. And they're saying it again now, that the dollar's empire is nearing its end. But here's the paradox. Every time a crisis hits, the dollar doesn't fall, it rises. Currencies from London to Buenos Aires, from Rome to Riyadh sink, but the dollar somehow drinks their collapse. Like a global vacuum. Like a milkshake straw sucking in the liquidity of the world. That's the heart of the dollar milkshake theory. It sounds funny, but it's deadly serious, because what it really describes is a hunger built into the financial architecture of the last 70 years. A system that ensures when everyone else runs out of credit, the United States gets stronger, not weaker. You see, official economists tell us currency strength comes from trade, productivity, or policy. But power, real power, comes from who issues the thing everyone else owes. The world runs on dollars. Debt, trade, and savings, all measured in the same unit, printed by one nation. The result? Every country's attempt to de-dollarize only deepens their dependency on it. It's not a conspiracy, it's arithmetic. There's only one balance sheet big enough to absorb the world's fear, the Federal Reserve's. And every time there's a crisis, from Asia in 1997 to Europe in 2012, the same pattern repeats. Capital flees weak currencies and piles into the dollar, pushing it higher. That's when emerging economies implode, not because of politics, but because their debts are denominated in dollars. This isn't a moral story yet, it's a mechanical one. The dollar milkshake isn't about greed or genius, it's about gravity. A black hole of liquidity where every ounce of global leverage eventually collapses inward. The tragedy? The more the world resists, the stronger it pulls. The US prints, others borrow. The Fed tightens, others suffocate. And so the system keeps consuming. Until it can't. If this made you look at global power differently, leave a comment where you're watching from. Because this isn't about America versus the world. It's about a design that rewards the printer and punishes the borrower. And we're all inside it. To understand the dollar milkshake, you have to go back, not to 2008, not even to 1971, but to 1944. Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. The war isn't over yet, but the victors already gather to decide what comes next. On one side, John Maynard Keynes, representing a bankrupt empire. On the other, Harry Dexter White, speaking for a creditor that suddenly owns most of the world's gold, the United States. The meeting looks diplomatic. In truth, it's economic conquest. Britain proposes a neutral global currency, the Bancor. The US rejects it. Why create a new money, they argue, when the world already trusts the dollar? By the time the delegates sign the agreement, the stage is set. Every currency will peg itself to the dollar, and the dollar will peg itself to gold at $35 an ounce. But here's the catch. Only one country has the right to print dollars. Everyone else must earn them through trade or loans. That's the seed of the milkshake. A global system where dollars flow out during boom times, then rush back to the US when fear returns. At first, it seems perfect. Europe rebuilds, Japan industrializes, oil is priced in dollars, and Wall Street becomes the central vein of global credit. The US doesn't need to conquer territory, it conquers balance sheets. But as the 1950s roll into the 1960s, something begins to break. The United States spends beyond its means. Wars in Korea and Vietnam, the Great Society programs, overseas bases. Gold reserves start draining. Countries like France and Switzerland begin asking for the metal instead of paper. Charles de Gaulle famously sends French ships to New York, demanding bullion. This is where the milkshake begins to take form. The US needs the world to hold dollars, not redeem them. So in August 1971, Nixon severs the link to gold. The dollar floats, untethered but still supreme. Because by then, the world's debts, trade contracts, and savings are already written in dollars. That moment, August 15th, 1971, is the economic equivalent of the British Navy leaving port in 1805. A new empire sails, not with cannons, but with credit. Now, without gold as an anchor, the system shifts from metal to promises. Central banks hold U.S. treasuries instead of gold bars. The dollar standard replaces the gold standard. And the machine keeps humming, powered by debt, not discipline. Then comes 1973, the oil shock. OPEC raises prices, and suddenly oil-rich nations are drowning in dollars. The U.S. negotiates quietly with Saudi Arabia. Price your oil only in dollars and we'll protect your kingdom. Thus, the petrodollar is born. Energy itself becomes dollar-denominated, guaranteeing permanent demand. From then on, every developing nation needs dollars to buy oil, trade goods, and pay debt. And to get dollars, they must borrow them from American banks. The milkshake straw grows longer. By the 1980s, Wall Street's reach is global. The IMF and World Bank act as gatekeepers, lending dollars to nations in crisis, but with strings attached: austerity, privatization, liberalization. Factories and ports once owned by states are sold off to foreign investors. It's not colonialism by flag, it's colonialism by spreadsheet. And yet, everyone joins in. Europe builds its markets on dollar funding. Japan finances its export miracle in dollars. Latin America borrows heavily in dollars. And when U.S. interest rates rise under Paul Volcker in 1981, their economies collapse overnight. The same pattern repeats again and again. 1997, the Asian financial crisis. 2000, the dot-com bubble. 2008, the global crash. Every time, the milkshake sucks liquidity out of the world and into the dollar. Not because of politics, but because the system demands it. This is why the dollar never dies. It's not that the U.S. is invincible. It's that everyone else is already drinking from its cup. When the straw tightens, when the Fed raises rates or fear spreads, capital runs home. Currencies fall, debts explode, and governments print their own money to survive. And so the architecture holds. Fragile, unfair, but brutally effective. It was built not as a conspiracy, but as a convenience. The world needed one unit of account, one deep market, one safe asset. The U.S. offered all three. And in doing so, it became the empire that didn't need colonies, just credit. Systems like this don't collapse because people stop believing in them. They collapse when mathematics catches up. If this gave you a new lens on how the dollar became the world's bloodstream, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because the next layer of this story isn't about creation. It's about illusion, when everyone believed this could last forever. The 1980s looked like victory. Inflation was crushed, Wall Street was roaring, and the dollar, freshly unchained from gold, became the world's high priest of confidence. To the public, the crisis of the 1970s had ended. To the architects of the system, it had only evolved. When you watched Reagan proclaim morning in America, you were watching the dawn of a financial empire built on credit expansion. But here's the trick. The prosperity wasn't earned. It was leveraged. With gold no longer a constraint, the dollar system could grow endlessly. Debt wasn't a sign of weakness anymore. It was the new currency. And the whole world bought in. Corporations issued bonds in dollars because investors trusted them more than local currencies. Governments borrowed in dollars because global banks offered them at lower rates. Consumers swiped cards and took loans because growth meant the same thing as spending. It was a golden illusion, an empire of paper that felt solid because everyone agreed it was. The 1990s made it look unstoppable. The Soviet Union collapsed, leaving America as the sole superpower, militarily and monetarily. The new gospel was globalization. Dollars flowed into emerging markets. Wall Street exported its methods, derivatives, leverage, securitization. The more the world borrowed, the stronger the dollar system became. Look at Japan. In the 1980s, its economy exploded. Its stock market tripled. Its corporations bought Rockefeller Center and Hollywood studios. Many thought Tokyo would overtake New York, but it wasn't real independence. It was credit expansion tied to the same dollar funding that powered Wall Street. When the bubble burst in 1991, Japan entered a lost decade. The straw sucked the milkshake back home. Europe tried to protect itself by creating the euro, a regional currency meant to rival the dollar. But the irony is that the euro was built on the same architecture: debt, dollar funding, and the illusion of perpetual growth. European banks borrowed in dollars to lend to their own governments. By 2010, that system cracked under its own arithmetic. And yet, for a while, it all seemed sustainable. Interest rates kept falling, asset prices kept rising, and every dip was rescued by more liquidity. The Federal Reserve became the central planner of the capitalist world. A paradox worthy of a history book, a free market that couldn't breathe without central bank support. The illusion spread into daily life. Housing wasn't a place to live, it was a speculative asset. The stock market wasn't a measure of value, it was the measure of faith. Nations stopped producing things and started producing credit. The factory worker was replaced by the financial engineer. Meanwhile, the developing world played its role. Countries like Brazil, Turkey, and Indonesia borrowed dollars to build cities and highways. They measured progress in dollar terms. But debt in foreign currency is a silent bomb. It grows heavier when your own money falls. Every period of boom hit a deeper vulnerability. In Washington and New York, they called this prosperity. In truth, it was leverage masquerading as stability. Each loan created the illusion of wealth until the borrower had to pay in a currency he couldn't print. You see, the beauty and the cruelty of the milkshake system is that it feeds on trust. The moment confidence expands, capital flows outward, nourishing the world. But when fear returns, everything rushes back to the dollar. The same mechanism that fueled growth now guarantees collapse. The 2000s were its most seductive phase: cheap money after the dot-com crash, massive global liquidity, and the rise of China as a manufacturing hub. The world's factories ran in yuan, but the contracts, the debt, the reserves, all in dollars. Even Beijing's reserves were simply loans to Washington, buying treasuries to keep its own currency weak. The milkshake reached full froth, and when the financial crisis came in 2008, the mask fell. The very system that claimed to diversify risk had in fact centralized it in the dollar. Europe's banks, Asia's exporters, Latin America's borrowers all needed the same lifeline. The Fed didn't just save America, it saved the dollar order itself by swapping trillions in liquidity to the rest of the world. The illusion of infinite growth died that year, but instead of reforming, the world doubled down. More debt, more stimulus, more quantitative easing. The milkshake wasn't drained, it was refilled, stronger than before. The moral? Systems don't sustain themselves on belief alone. They last as long as the numbers still add up. When credit grows faster than income, when promises multiply faster than production, collapse is just delayed arithmetic. If this part made the growth miracle look more like a well-decorated bubble, let me know in the comments where you're listening from, because every illusion ends, and when it does, what's left is truth in debt. There's a moment in every empire when confidence stops being a strength and becomes a liability. For the dollar system, that moment came in 2008. But it wasn't the beginning of the end. It was the revelation of what the system truly was. You remember the images: Lehman Brothers collapsing, bankers with boxes, headlines screaming global crisis. But behind that theater was a mathematical event. The world had created more dollar-denominated promises than there were actual dollars to settle them. Think of it like oxygen. The whole planet was breathing dollars, but the supply was finite, controlled by the Federal Reserve. When panic hit, everyone inhaled at once. There simply wasn't enough air. Banks in London, Hong Kong, and Frankfurt discovered that their balance sheets were full of dollar assets, but they couldn't access dollar funding. That's when the global scramble began. Interest rates in emerging markets spiked, currencies crashed, and nations with booming economies suddenly looked like they were drowning. In a few weeks, decades of global prosperity evaporated, And the only entity with the power to stop the collapse wasn't the IMF or the United Nations, it was the Federal Reserve of the United States. Between late 2008 and 2009, the Fed opened dollar swap lines with foreign central banks, effectively becoming the world's lender of last resort. Trillions of dollars flowed out, not as generosity, but as self-preservation. Because if the dollar system collapsed abroad, it would implode at home too. This was the exposure. The curtain lifted and the audience saw the machinery. A global network built on leverage with one central valve in Washington. The milkshake theory, long invisible, was suddenly visible. The straw was real, and the milk was draining from everywhere else into the U.S. Then came the aftermath, the era of zero interest rates. Central banks printed money at a pace history had never seen. The narrative was stimulus. The reality was triage. The financial world had become addicted to cheap dollars, and the Fed was now both dealer and doctor. But here's the paradox. While this saved the system, it also made it more fragile. Each rescue required larger interventions. Each round of quantitative easing pulled more capital into the U.S., strengthening the dollar while crushing the periphery. Look at what happened between 2011 and 2016. Commodity prices fell, emerging markets suffered capital flight, and entire nations like Brazil and Turkey saw their currencies lose half their value. Not because of war or revolution, because the Fed hinted at tightening. A few words from Washington could sink a continent. This is the moment when mathematics defeated politics. You can't vote away interest rates. You can't legislate liquidity. You can print currency, but not trust. When the COVID crisis hit in 2020, the pattern repeated on a godlike scale. The world stopped. Yet the dollar demand didn't. Once again, the Fed had to flood the planet with liquidity, providing over $11 trillion in support through direct purchases, loans, and swaps. Every other currency weakened. Every balance sheet outside the U.S. inflated. The milkshake was now hypercharged. The more global debt there was, the greater the thirst for dollars. And each crisis, each attempt to escape, made the dollar stronger. That's the cruel beauty of this system. Its strength is built on others' weakness. When Argentina collapses, when the Eurozone wobbles, when Japan devalues, money doesn't disappear. It migrates. It runs to the dollar. But every migration has a cost. The stronger the dollar gets, the harder it becomes for the rest of the world to breathe. Corporations abroad see their debts swell. Governments burn reserves defending their currencies. Inflation rises where dollars are scarce, and deflation creeps in where they're hoarded. It's not a conspiracy, it's architecture. The same pipeline built in 1944, expanded in 1971, turbocharged in 2008, now dictates global survival. And so the collapse isn't a single explosion. It's a series of slow implosions, from the periphery to the core. A developing nation's currency here, a bank run there, a sovereign default next. Each one strengthens the dollar's gravity, until one day it pulls too hard, even for itself, because even the printer has limits. When too many dollars exist as debt and not as production, confidence erodes from within. And that's where we are heading. Toward the moment when the milkshake, once delicious, becomes toxic. Arithmetic doesn't negotiate. It only waits. If this part helped you see 2008 and every crisis since as chapters of the same story, drop a comment with your city. Because what we call crashes are not accidents. They're the system resetting its mathematics at someone else's expense. If you're watching this in 2025, you're living inside the echo chamber of that architecture. The system hasn't changed. It's just wearing a digital suit. The names are new: quantitative tightening, liquidity operations, CBDCs, but the gravity is the same. The dollar milkshake is still draining the world. Look around. Every few years, headlines predict the end of the dollar. BRICS build new payment system. China and Russia trade in yuan. Saudi Arabia considers non-dollar oil. But each time the pattern repeats. Currencies fall, capital flees, the dollar surges. Not because Washington plans it, but because no other balance sheet can handle global fear. It's not ideology, it's plumbing. Every major transaction, from a barrel of oil to a shipload of semiconductors, still flows through the same pipes: the SWIFT network, the Fed's clearing channels, and dollar-based correspondent banks. Even when two countries trade in yuan or rupees, the settlement is often calculated in dollars. The straw is invisible, but it's still there. After 2020, the milkshake entered a new phase: digital leverage. Central banks printed trillions, governments ran record deficits, and the world's investors poured those dollars into American assets. The NASDAQ, the Treasury market, even real estate, all absorbed the flood. Meanwhile, emerging markets lost capital. Their currencies weakened, their imports grew costlier, and their debts heavier. The irony is almost poetic. The more the US prints, the more the rest of the world needs dollars to stabilize. Printing dilutes, yes, but dilution in the center tightens the noose at the edges. By 2022, when the Federal Reserve began raising interest rates to fight inflation, the milkshake effect went nuclear. Dozens of nations saw their currencies collapse. The yen, the pound, the peso, the rupee, all fell to historic lows against the dollar. It wasn't because the US economy was perfect. It was because the world's debts were denominated in the same currency that was now being drained. Think of it this way. The Fed raised rates in Washington, and families went bankrupt in Cairo, Jakarta, and Buenos Aires. The milkshake didn't just suck capital, it sucked stability. Even the rich world isn't immune. Europe's energy crisis in 2022 revealed how vulnerable the euro still is. Japan's massive debt forced its central bank to defend its own bonds by printing, which only weakened the yen further. The Bank of England had to intervene in its bond market to save British pensions. All different nations, same disease: dollar dependency. And yet the illusion persists. Stock markets recover, new technologies emerge, and everyone believes the next era will be different. But the foundation is unchanged. Global debt has never been higher, and almost 60% of it is still in dollars. The milkshake is now algorithmic. Fintech platforms, crypto exchanges, and digital payment rails all price assets in dollars. Even Bitcoin, the supposed escape, is measured in the very unit it claims to reject. That's how deep the system runs. Even its rebellions use its language. Meanwhile, the US faces its own irony. The dollar's dominance makes imports cheap and capital abundant, but it also destroys domestic industry. The same force that empowers the empire weakens the home. American factories closed because capital chased higher yields abroad. Workers were replaced by algorithms and arbitrage. The empire got rich, but hollow. And so the world enters a new cycle, a silent struggle between two instincts: the global need for dollars and the growing resentment against them. Nations try to build alternatives: BRICS currency proposals, regional clearinghouses, digital yuan networks. But replacing the dollar isn't like changing a logo. It's like rebuilding gravity. It requires trust, liquidity, and enforcement. Three things no other power can yet combine. Until that changes, the milkshake remains. The dollar still drinks the world's liquidity, not because it's fair, but because it's functional. This is why when you hear that the dollar is doomed, you should ask, doomed by whom? By arithmetic, yes, eventually. But until someone else can print the world's fear into safety, every crisis will end the same way: a rising dollar and another currency buried under it. That's the modern echo of the system built at Bretton Woods, baptized in 1971 and revealed in 2008. It's not the end of globalization. It's globalization's hangover. If this made you look at today's financial news with a different lens, comment, "I see the pattern," because what you're seeing isn't chaos, it's design. And that design still rules every bank, every loan, every screen. Every empire believes it's eternal, until arithmetic reminds it otherwise. The Roman coin lost its silver. The French assignat lost its trust. The British pound lost its empire. And one day, the dollar too will meet the law that no power can repeal. Numbers must balance. The dollar milkshake theory isn't a prophecy of American triumph. It's a diagnosis of global addiction. The world drinks dollars because it needs them to survive, but every sip deepens dependence. And like any addiction, the final stage is not expansion, but collapse. When you look at charts and interest rates, it's easy to forget this is a human story. Behind every debt crisis are families losing savings, nations selling resources, societies trading sovereignty for stability. That's the hidden price of the strong dollar. It's not just economics. It's a transfer of life's effort from the periphery to the center. But here's the paradox we rarely face. The system didn't survive this long because of evil. It survived because it worked. For decades, it financed progress, lifted billions, connected the planet. The problem isn't bad intent, it's bad math. When promises grow faster than production, trust must eventually be devalued. And yet, this is where opportunity hides. Every collapse in history has cleared the ground for something truer, something anchored not in illusion but in real value. Gold was once that anchor. Then it was credit. Maybe next it will be energy, data, or time. The medium changes, but the rule does not. Value must be backed by something finite. If you're hearing this in 2025, remember this. The dollar's strength is the mirror of the world's weakness. When it finally breaks, it won't be the end of money. It'll be the end of our belief that one nation can issue it for all. Arithmetic cannot be deceived. It waits, patient and silent, beneath the slogans and the screens. And when it returns, as it always does, it doesn't punish the wicked or reward the wise. It simply resets the ledger. If this opened a new way of seeing power, debt, and history, leave a comment where you're watching from. Because one day another generation will study this system the way we study Rome, and they'll ask the same question. How did they think it could last forever?